What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we've got our Week 10 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup, so make sure to tune in. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. Let us hear it in the comment section. Do you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. But with that being said, let's get right into it. Today's video is brought to you guys by Birddogs. And look, I know we're all searching for that perfect pair of shorts or pants that offers the best style, the best comfort, the best bang for your buck. Well, guess what? That search is over because Birddogs offers all of that and so much more. If you're looking for shorts, they have a ton of options with activewear, casual wear, or even beachwear. On top of that, their pants have a selection of khakis, joggers, and sweatpants. So what are you waiting for? Regardless of the occasion of the season, get yourself the most stylish, the most comfortable pair of pants with a built-in liner from Birddogs.com. And if you use promo code ADP today, you'll get a free rope hat with your purchase. Again, that's birddogs.com, code ADP, and you'll get a free rope hat with your purchase. Make sure to check out birddogs.com, link in the description, and we kick off Week 10 with the Falcons at the Panthers on Thursday night. And here, not an ideal matchup in terms of the wide receivers. I know these two teams played 2 weeks ago, and DJ Moore went absolutely bananas, but what I said after that game and heading into the Bengals game is going to be what I repeat here, and that is the fact that PJ Walker has these flashes at the quarterback position with Carolina versus certain opponents where it looks pretty good, but then just a week later, it looks absolutely god-awful. And that was the case versus the Falcons 2 weeks ago, and then subsequently versus the Cincinnati Bengals a week afterwards. Now, I don't think that we're going to see the exact same game from the Panthers like we did with them versus the Falcons 2 weeks ago. And I know it's very recent and it's hard to kind of remove some of those memories from that game, but I think that's what you have to do here if you want to realistically project what these wide receivers are going to do, and that's my aim. So with DJ Moore, as has been the case pretty much the entire season, he is a boom or bust low-end wide receiver too. Sure, he has some really nice upside. He's very talented, but the quarterback situation is going to hold him back in Carolina. We know that PJ Walker is going to be the starter, but that's just the way it is. The Falcons aren't, the toughest defensive team in the NFL, so, the upside for DJ Moore is higher than what it was versus the Cincinnati Bengals, but still, he also has that floor, so just realize that. And then for the Falcons, I'm sitting all of their wide receivers. The guys that they're targeting the most are Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and then everyone else is kind of just sprinkled in here and there inconsistently. And even when they do target Drake London a bunch, Marcus Mariota finishes with like 15, 18 completions a game. They're not quality targets, so I'm sitting all the Falcon wide receivers. Terrace Marshall is also a name you see here for the Panthers. These last couple of weeks, he's been getting it going, but I still think he's that number 2 option for Carolina. If I can barely trust DJ Moore, I'm not going to fully invest in starting Terrace Marshall, so he is a sit for me. Then we go to the Seahawks at the Bucs. This is a little bit easier. So let's start with the duos of Seattle, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. I think that they're going to see a lot more run here because, honestly, I think that the Seattle offense, their rushing attack, is going to struggle versus this Buccaneers defense. So it's going to be more so on the arm of Geno Smith here on Metcalf and Lockett than in games prior. So I do like their upside from that perspective. I have them both as low to mid-level wide receiver 2s on the week. Then for the Bucs, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, they're both coming off ultra high volume games here. And that was a case where Tom Brady almost threw 60 times in that game versus the Rams. I don't think that's going to be the case here, but Evans and Godwin are still high-end wide receiver 2s. It's them and then everybody else. Huge tier drop afterwards in terms of the pass catchers, in terms of how many targets they're going to see. That's why I would rather only trust Evans and Godwin. They've got some decent touchdown upside, and that's why you see guys like Julio Jones and Scotty Miller as sits. You could put in Russell Gage there as well if he happens to play. Just those guys aren't really going to get quality targets. in a game where, I mean, Tom Brady, again, isn't throwing for like 60 attempts. So for that reason, they are sits in my eyes. Then we go to the Lions at the Bears. I'm only interested in the Lions side of things here. Amon-Ra is somebody that I trust. I think he's a high-end wide receiver too. And then we have to see with Josh Reynolds, if he plays this week or he doesn't. If he does, then I wouldn't mind taking a flyer on him, because without TJ Hawkinson on this offense, somebody's going to have to step up. DeAndre Swift is not 100%, and there's going to be some targets to go around here. So Josh Reynolds could have a possibility of delivering some successful performances here. If he doesn't play, then I think that logic transfers over to Khalif Raymond, and I would take a chance on him. To me, he would be a high-end wide receiver 3. And then for the Bears, you might be surprised to see Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool as sits, especially with Mooney coming off a pretty successful outing, and with the Bears having so much offensive success. But the reason the Bears are having so much offensive success is because of Justin Fields' legs. Let's be honest, we're not starting Justin Fields because of what he can do with his arm. Even in that game where he put up 40-plus fantasy points this last week versus the Dolphins, he still only had 125 yards passing, folks. They were short touchdowns that he got through the air. So that's why I'm not all that excited about this, receiving core for the Bears. I'd still rather sit Mooney, sit Claypool. I just don't think right now that Justin Fields provides enough upside for these pass catchers specifically. Afterwards, Browns at the Dolphins. Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, I'm starting both of them here. Now, we'll see. David Njoku is allegedly going to play this week, and that could take away some targets from DPJ, but I just think the Dolphins are so high octane that DPJ is going to be involved regardless. I have Amari Cooper as a mid-level wide receiver too, and then DPJ I think could surprise as a low-end wide receiver too. For the Dolphins, both Tyreek and Jalen Waddle, are wide receiver ones in fantasy and in real life. I think that continues here versus the Browns. Afterwards, Broncos at the Titans. I really don't want to start anyone here. You can see everybody is a sit for me. Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy are the top 2 names for the Broncos. Problem is, Russell Wilson, if he continues to average like 15, 18 completions a game, and with Greg Dulcich getting more and more involved every single game at the tight end position, that's going to take away from Sutton. That's going to take away from Jeudy. So I would rather avoid both of them here. For the Titans, especially if Malik Willis is the quarterback again, we've seen it 2 weeks in a row. Those wide receivers aren't worth a damn. Even with Ryan Tannehill, they're not really worth anything, so you sit all the Tennessee wide receivers. Moving on, Vikings at the Bills. You'll start Justin Jefferson. He's a top 5 wide receiver. Adam Thielen, similar to what we said last week. Yes, he is a start. It's a good matchup. He's going to get some volume, so decent PPR play. But keep in mind, with TJ Hawkinson now joining the team, there's going to be less volume for Adam Thielen. So his floor a little bit lower, his ceiling a little bit lower as well. And now, to me, he's kind of that high-end wide receiver 3 category, going to be a little bit touchdown dependent. For the Bills, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, those are the top 2 guys. I wouldn't get too carried away afterwards, especially with Josh Allen nursing an elbow injury. Now, the details of that still haven't fully come out, but if it was super serious, then I think more information would have come out already. So I think he plays, and Diggs remains a top 3 wide receiver. Gabe Davis, kind of a boomer bust guy, but he's in the mid-level wide receiver 2 range. Then Texans at the Giants. Again, another game where I want to sit all the wide receivers here. For the Texans, Brandon Cooks didn't even play last week because he was upset that he didn't get traded. What's going to happen this week? Who the hell knows? And similar to what I've said about a lot of these quarterbacks, Davis Mills, he's going to have 15 completions a game. It's really tough to trust Brandon Cooks. I think he's way too boomer bust. If there is, I will be fair, one wide receiver to start in this game, it would be Brandon Cooks, but just realize that he could absolutely disappoint. Just not on the same page with that organization, so that also kind of plays into it. I'd rather not take the risk here. Then for the Giants, as has been the case all year long, I'm sitting all the Giant wide receivers. I think this is going to be a big Saquon Barkley type of game versus that god-awful Texans run defense. Probably Daniel Jones getting involved as well, so I'm sitting the wide receivers here for New York. Then Jags at the Chiefs. I'll start Christian Kirk. I'll start Zay Jones. To me, again, These are the top two wide receivers for the Jaguars. I've kind of been pushing Zay Jones these last couple of weeks, but this week more than any, I think he's going to be a viable option because this Chiefs offense puts up a bunch of points versus you, and the Jaguars are going to have to air it out a bunch. Trevor Lawrence wouldn't shock me here if this is his highest, attempt game in terms of pass attempts this entire year. For the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes, let this sink in, almost had 70 pass attempts this last week. That is not going to happen as frequently. Juju Smith-Schuster still remains the main guy for me. Kadarius Toney didn't really do all that much, even though the Chiefs traded for him. He would still be a sit. I still think that Juju Smith-Schuster is a little bit boom or bust. He's not going to see as many targets as he did last week going forward, and neither are Mecole Hardman and MVS, why I have them as sits. But to me, it's Kelsey, then it's Juju, then there's a gap. Then you're kind of guessing who gets the touchdown. I have Juju Smith-Schuster as probably a low to mid-level wide receiver too. Then I wouldn't get too kind of aggressive with Marvin Jones and the other guys for the Kansas City Chiefs, like I mentioned. Afterwards, Saints at the Steelers. For the Saints, the only guy that you really want to start is Chris Olave. I think in PPR formats, he's a solid, at worst, low-end wide receiver too. And then, his ceiling is relatively high in the high-end wide receiver 2 category. For the Steelers, they did trade away Chase Claypool, and I think this is a game where they're going to have, passing opportunities. So Deontay Johnson and George Pickens, I think, are probably both high-end wide receiver 3s. Again, not ideal. I'm not saying that these guys are going to crush it by any means, but there's some games where you just want to avoid the wide receivers altogether. And I think here, looking at this game, especially with Claypool out and the opponent, that both these guys can have, some success. So as long as you know what the expectations should be, high-end wide receiver 3s, then go ahead. Then Colts at the Raiders. Michael Pittman, you're going to start for the Colts because he's the most talented guy by far. They have a head coaching change, so we'll see what they do here, what the team looks like now. Are they going to focus more on the rushing attack? Like, is Ellinger still going to be the guy moving forward? He will for at least this week, which I think caps the upside for all these pass catchers, like I've been saying. That's why I think Pittman is a low-end wide receiver 2, probably high-end wide receiver 3. For the Raiders, Devontae Adams just went nuclear. That's why he's a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL in fantasy. You're going to continue to fire him up. He has a little bit more up and down games than we would like, but he is still a solid wide receiver 1. And then I'm sitting everyone else here. Alec Pierce, Paris Campbell, you can't trust with Ellinger. Hunter Renfrow, Matt Collins, just aren't getting enough volume. Derek Carr, not consistent enough, so they are sits. Afterwards, Cardinals at the Rams. DeAndre Hopkins, easy. He's been a top 5 wide receiver since he returned. I'd also take a chance here on Rondale Moore. I do think he's in that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 range, but I think the Rams are going to shut down the Cardinals on the ground, so they're going to have to throw it a bunch. To me, it's Hopkins and it's Rondale Moore. You're hoping for the volume with Rondale Moore, so keep that in mind. For the Rams, Cooper Kupp, that's been the case all season long. He played last week. I anticipate he'll play again. He's a wide receiver 1, top 3 wide receiver. Enough said there. Allen Robinson, to me, is a sit. I kind of had him as a potential start last week, only if Cooper Kupp, was going to be limited, if he didn't play. But now that he's back healthy, with Van Jefferson also back, Allen Robinson is back in the sit column for me. Afterwards, Cowboys at the Packers. I'm only starting CeeDee Lamb here. The Cowboys do have other talented wide receivers, but especially versus the Packers, with how bad they have been, I think this is going to be a big Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard game. So from that perspective, I'm only starting CeeDee Lamb, who is kind of a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. And then for the Packers, the reason why you only see one name, that being Allen Lazard, is because literally all the other Packer wide receivers are hurt. So Lazard is going to see a lot of volume, especially if Aaron Jones doesn't play on top of that. He could very well see double-digit targets, so to me, he's a great start. I think he can produce high-end wide receiver 2 numbers. Then Chargers at the 49ers. You're going to start Josh Palmer. He really delivered this last week, especially in PPR formats. He was the top wide receiver for LA with Keenan Allen out, with Mike Williams out. We know Williams is going to miss this week as well. Keenan Allen, I have his name as a start if he plays, but there's an asterisk next to it because that freaking hamstring, it must be the mother of all hamstrings because he hasn't played since week 1 and he had a setback after the bye week. That's why he didn't play in week 9. So TBD here, if he doesn't play, DeAndre Carter could be a solid, dart throw. I'd take a chance on him. but realize again he's in the boomer bust category because Gerald Everett at tight end is going to see targets. Austin Eckler is obviously going to see targets. And then I know Michael Bandy had some decent volume this last week. That I don't think is worth chasing, so he's a sit for me. And if Keenan Allen does play, then DeAndre Carter would be a sit. For the 49ers, Deebo Samuel, if he plays, you start him. He would be in that high-end wide receiver 2 category. And then Brendan Ayuk also is a start for me. If Samuel doesn't play, he's a high-end wide receiver 2. If Deebo does shoot up, then Ayuk would be a low-end wide receiver 2 for me. Then Commanders at the Eagles. I'll start Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel. But, what I said about Taylor Heinicke finally kind of, appeared, and that's that he's a very up and down kind of inconsistent quarterback. We've seen it in years prior. Now we saw it this last week versus the Vikings. If Curtis Samuel didn't have that just one big touchdown play, would have had a dud of a week. And Terry McLaurin, yes, he got the majority of the volume, which is really nice to see, but obviously he's more talented than what he produced this last week. The Eagles also have a very stout defense. So while I will start Terry McLaurin, and I have him as a low to mid-level wide receiver too, realize that these ceilings and floors for these players with Heinicke are very variable. Curtis Samuel, to me, is a high-end wide receiver 3. For the Eagles, you much prefer this duo, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. The Commanders don't scare you in the secondary. The Eagles have been great. A.J. Brown, a wide receiver 1. Devonta Smith, kind of a boomer bust, mid-level wide receiver 2. But with that, we wrap up our Week 10 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. Let us hear in the comment section. Do you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. But in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.